Welcome to another NDK podcast with me, your host, Nick Kebbell. This episode, I'm joined by Audrey Adeline from SquareX, who are headquartered in Singapore, but they're global and they're building out across the USA at the moment as well. Founded in 2023. They're a company disrupting the browser security market with the industry's first browser detection and response solution, BDR solution. We explore how attackers are exploiting browsers, from stealing passwords to a new attack technique called browser sync jacking, where a single malicious extension can completely hijack the browser and eventually take over the entire system. So serious stuff. Audrey also shares the benefits and challenges of working in a cybersecurity startup. She goes through how many caps that she wears and a typical day. There isn't really a typical day for her, she explains, and how SquareX is leading with research-led approach and also key insights on moderating the WISP, the Women in Security and Privacy panel that Audrey was involved in, and discussing both the barriers women face in cybersecurity and the innovations shaping the industry generally. So let's get stuck in. Hi, Audrey. Thanks for joining us. Great to have you.
Thanks for having me, Nick.
I've done a brief intro already. So did you want to, or are you able to give us a sort of an overview of your background and how you arrived at SquareX and what you're currently doing at SquareX?
Yeah, of course. So I have a slightly unconventional background when it comes to security. I started out as a biochemist, so completely different from, what I do today, and then spent some time in, let's say, the corporate world. So my first job out of college was in Boston Consulting Group, where I was working with a bunch of enterprise companies as a management consultant, primarily in the private equity team. And shortly after, I joined Sequoia, which is a venture capital firm, and became a software investor. And that was actually where I first interacted with SquareX. It was one of the companies that I had invested in. And I'll share more about this later, I'm sure. But that's what got me excited in security, what got me excited in the space, and ended up joining the company full time.
Got it. Good. I thought there would be a connection somewhere, so that makes sense. So, what inspired you then to move from? It's quite a different journey, isn't it, from a venture capitalist capital background to the cybersecurity space?
Mhm. Yeah, the funny thing is, I actually avoided going to cyber for the longest time because my dad was a software reseller in Indonesia. He sold a lot of the endpoint security products like antiviruses and EDRs. And so, being the rebellious child that I am, I wanted to do anything but cyber. So it's
Right.
funny how I've gone full circle. But I really got first re-exposed to it at Sequoia, looking at a lot of spaces in cyber that was interesting and up and coming. But I would say, look, I don't think I had joined cybersecurity because I had an innate interest in it. I think
Hmm.
that was a discovery that I have post joining SquareX. It was very much, I felt that SquareX was solving a very interesting product, a very interesting problem, and had a
Hmm.
really, beautiful product, and it just happened to be in cybersecurity.
And it's I guess a slightly sort of unconventional route into cybersecurity. A lot of other people in the industry come from technical backgrounds, or
Mhm.
they fall into it from an early career perspective. How did you manage to transition into the role, given that you didn't have any kind of formal study in it? I know that your dad was in the industry, so you had that
Mhm.
kind of that connection there, and obviously the connection from when you were working in the investment space. But
Mhm.
what was the transition like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely challenging. Lots of things to catch up on, especially if you're entering security at this time and age. I think it was a lot more simpler 20 years ago, but now there's a
Mm.
lot of historical context on how products has evolved, with all the acquisitions going on, all the vendors claim to do a bunch of different things. So I think what helped is there's a lot of resources out there today. So I'd say lots and lots of reading. So everything from dark reading, hacker news, reading technical blogs of other attack researchers, lots of dumb questions to the team. So I'm very grateful for the tech team at SquareX who always patiently answer all my, non-technical questions.
Mm.
But I think also having the right mentor really helps. It is a space where, despite the amount of data and stories space out there, there isn't a lot of structure education system. So if you look at most of the top universities, very few of them provide actual cyber courses. And even if you look at webinars or books, there isn't a lot of structured way to learn cyber. But I think that's that's good and bad thing, right? So it's bad because it's challenging to learn, but it's also good in the sense that that means whoever wants to enter cyber has sort of a level playing ground. But I think because of that, it's even more important to have a mentor who has a clear
Mm.
understanding of the space.
Yeah, and I think it's testament to the industry as well that you can sort of cross that bridge into, you can segue into cybersecurity from pretty much any background almost, can't you? As long as you put the effort in and the big word mentor as well. But we'll touch on that at the end because we talk about the next generation, and I'm sure you've got some good advice about that. So SquareX established 2003, I believe.
Oh, we're actually established in 2023,
Yeah.
so 20
Okay.
years
So,
after.
forgive me. I'm 20 years out. Yeah. So in terms of the BDR product, the browser detection and response product that SquareX is I guess is a sort of an industry first. Can you tell us
Mhm.
about that and what it does?
Yeah, of course. So I think the short answer and parallel that a lot of people find easy to understand is what EDR is to the endpoint, SquareX is to the browser. So the
Mm,
thesis really here is, look, the browser is becoming the new endpoint, right? When we compare to Netscape Navigator and all the old browsers when it was first invented in 1990s and early 2000s,
mm,
it has changed a lot, right?
mm,
It had started from a very simple website renderer, but today it's almost like a complex super app where you access pretty much all of your data and or your activities through the browser. So, if you think about just even from a few years ago compared to now, a lot of apps like Photoshop or even Microsoft Word now have a SaaS version that are accessed through the website. Similarly, people are downloading less and less files. A lot of
mm,
your data is being created, shared, and stored in the cloud, and
mm,
all of that is accessed through the browser. So really, a lot of these trends, whether it's driven by COVID, proliferation of crowd, has led the browser to become the center of employee and user activity in the device. So I think something like 85% of device time today is spent on the browser.
mm,
And so because of that, the attack vector has also shifted, right? So the attacker now, kind of the crown jewels are all in the internet and the browser. And as a result, we also need the right defenses put in place. And unfortunately, existing tools, they're great for what they do, but they're not browser native. And as a result, do not have the right data and telemetries to be able to detect the attacks that are native in the browser.
So how does it address, if you like, the evolving cybersecurity threats that we see globally?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. So because, well, maybe just to share a little bit more on how SquareX works, we actually
Mm,
come in the form of a browser extension. So we
mm,
work across, all of your popular browsers, whether it's Edge, Chrome, Safari, Firefox. But because we are a browser native, first class citizen, we are able to tap into the rich browser telemetry. So things like DOM changes, how users are interacting with websites, browser APIs, extension behavior and runtime, all these things that are critical to understand what exactly happens when an attack in the browser application layer
mm.
occurs. So unlike SASE and SSE that use proxy data to infer application layer attacks, we actually have a clear view on exactly what happened and how we can prevent it. Um, and I think this allows us to become the first line of defense whenever it comes to browser-based application layer attacks.
And I know that it's an industry first, and I think your founder Vivek
Mhm.
created the idea, and obviously the organization. He comes from um, a strong entrepreneurial background. With regards to, I guess, being sort of early industry adopters, have you got kind of any success stories that you can share with us that organizations, corporations have
Mhm.
partners with SquareX, and they've you got some stats out there that you can shed some light on?
Yeah, of course. I can share with you a story with one of our customers. Of course, no names mentioned
Oh,
here,
yeah.
but we had a customer that has been struggling for the past few years with an insider threat. So a couple of their employees were siphoning some very critical IP to their competitors, and for the longest
Mm,
time, they couldn't figure out who. So they had all the SASE SSE solution, endpoint DLP solution, but they could not pinpoint, who was actually leaking the data. And that's really because the way that SASE and SSE worked, it's almost like if you think about passing out notes, I'm basically writing a piece of paper, you're writing
mm,
on a piece of paper, we put it through the shutter, and then we tell a third person to figure out, hey, who wrote what and what was the messaging.
mm,
So with SquareX, what we could do is we could immediately discover, you know, who were the people who were sending all these emails and sending out the data that were deemed as sensitive. So we were able to identify based on the content and the user who was exactly the insider threat. And we did that within actually a couple of weeks of SquareX being installed. And I think that was a very proud moment for us. And of course, have a couple more stories on the malware side, but I think insider threat is always one of those things that are extremely difficult to figure out.
Okay, yeah, brilliant. And I've noticed as well that, and I've spoken to a few people that SquareX is very much a sort of a research-led company,
Mhm.
and that you published a lot of research papers on your website as well. You've got this sort of dedicated research function, which I think is largely based in Singapore. Um, are you able to tell us a little bit about your role with that? And I guess, what's happened in the past year in terms of new research announcements and findings?
Mhm. Yeah, of course. It's actually my favorite part of the job. I think coming from a science background, I always missed the
Mm,
research part in my previous two roles. But I'm actually leading an interesting project right now called the Year of Browser Bugs. So what we're doing is every month we're releasing a big attack where it exploits architectural limitations of the browser. So instead of
mm,
things that can be patched, we focus on things that, attacks that are leveraging legitimate functions within the browser. So in January, for example, we released browser sync tracking, which is a way that through a browser extension, we could essentially take over the whole browser and eventually the device.
mm,
And just a couple weeks ago, we released one called polymorphic extensions, where we
mm,
demonstrated that, hey, a malicious browser extension could essentially remove any existing extension you have and then essentially replicate itself to look exactly like that. So imagine a password manager or a crypto wallet. So the user would basically go ahead and enter their credentials there, and it can be used to, log into the actual app and access all the passwords stored in your password manager or transfer out all of your crypto out of your crypto wallet. So it's really, attacks that are focused on user behavior and social engineering and not very patchable from a browser standpoint. So I think for
mm.
every of these disclosures, we do work with Chrome very closely, do share our disclosures, but for the most part, it's really, preying on employee behavior. And I think this is one very special thing about the browser, right? Unlike, traditional solutions where, if you compromise a device, you basically only get access to that device. But with, browser-based attacks, you just need to compromise one employee. And because of the existence of shared drive and shared resources, you can essentially get access to the entire organization through just one person.
I saw the crypto piece actually on the Syncjacking research paper, which I would imagine it's excuse me, is alarming quite a few people globally because of the wallets and
Mhm.
all that kind of stuff. And you hear stories out there that wallets go missing and so on. Do you see then sort of the routing through the browser sort of an increased threat for industries like crypto and Bitcoin, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think, look, today everything, all data, whether it's, your credentials, a lot of, um, your banking infrastructure is
Mm,
accessed through the browser, and part of that is because, there's a movement towards SaaS apps and cloud storage.
mm,
And, anything that's access to the browser is now becoming a threat, partly because the reward is large for these attackers, but also partly because they know that compared to, let's say, your endpoint security, it's much, much less developed for most enterprises. Most
Mm,
people don't have an existing BDR. Most enterprises do not yet have a clear browser security strategy. So in
mm,
terms of risk reward, whether it's crypto or anything else that's accessed through the browser, doing browser-based attacks is incredibly rewarding for attackers. And as a result, we're seeing a lot of more attacks shifting there. So for example, on Christmas Day, the Cyber Haven breach that was completely initiated and conducted through the browser, where
mm,
essentially you had a consent grant attack on Chrome Store developers. And we've seen a lot of very similar examples delivered through the browser, right? The Midnight Blizzard RDP-based attack. So I think absolutely. Unfortunately, today there is not enough widespread use tool for enterprises to understand what web attacks they're being exposed to. It is a new space.
mm,
So I think there's significant education to be done, but attacks are there. It's
mm.
just about finding more evidence and more data and recording. I think in the next, say 12 to 18 months, it'll definitely become very apparent where the attack surface is shifting.
Yeah, sounds it. Interesting. Okay. Um, and I guess, I mean, moving into something that, I mean, we're in the month of March, which is Women in Cybersecurity Month, which is an amazing fate, and we've been in the industry for many years now, and it's always been a big talking point, especially the early years of cybersecurity when it became very popular and sort of came out of information security. Um, I guess how has your journey shaped your views on women in security because of the route that you came into it?
Yeah, I've always been in male-dominated industries, whether it's private equity, VC, tech. But despite that, I really did notice that compared to even those industries, there really isn't a lot of women in cyber.
Yeah. Mm,
What I would say is, regardless of industry, I think whatever industry where, women just, women just like men bring a lot of things to the table. So it's a huge cost, regardless of industry, to not appeal to such a large group of talent,
mm,
whether due to structural reasons or, maybe interest reasons. And given that, security is a very important space for many enterprises, it is absolutely critical that we get the best talent available out there, whether
mm.
it's for the defense or attack side.
Yeah, I think many years ago it was the same sort of issue in technology generally,
Mhm.
and then that bridge started to shorten with different initiatives and groups and that kind of stuff. And then when cybersecurity came sort of popular
Mhm.
and really streamlined over the last, say, 10 years, 7 to 10 years, the same issues obviously lie now in cybersecurity. There is a huge, there's minimal women in cybersecurity versus male, and it's still very male dominant as you suggest. And I guess
Yeah.
that segues into WISP, Women in Security and Privacy, which you're part of.
Mhm.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, of course. So I'm part of the HQ committee. We host a bunch of different events for women who are interested in security and privacy. So I
Mm,
think we have about 3,000 members across the US and internationally. And we do a bunch of different events, whether that's career events, more technical workshops, like our Hacker Summer event, even lock picking. So lots of very exciting
mm,
events.
mm,
So recently we did host a panel on a career panel where we invited a bunch of CISO and security leaders. And the key topic there we discussed is, how do you decide between going down a leadership and IC path? And I
mm,
think credits to the ladies that were part of the panel. There was a lot of good advice. And I think one of the key takeaways for me is, I remember asking one of them, hey, like, is there a time when, it's too early for you to take up a managerial role and, you should maybe focus on sort of your IC skills instead? But one of the responses was actually just to, just take it. Unfortunately, it is still true that leadership roles don't come by very often for
mm,
women in this space and perhaps more generally.
mm,
But I think also there's an element of, women ourselves sometimes feeling a little bit of imposter syndrome. And I've always felt that I was relatively confident. But I think reflecting after what was discussed on the panel, I realized that there are times when I feel like, am I good enough to take up this role? But the truth is, if somebody offers you that, they probably see something in you. And maybe part of it is also accepting that you'll never be truly ready to take on a role, and part of the role is also learning and upskilling yourself. So, I would say if you are interested in security and you're offered the opportunity to lead and you want to lead, you should definitely just go for it.
Yeah, I think that leads to the diversity and the equality and inclusion piece, isn't it? And
Mhm.
and then as many initiatives that can be um, found today in cybersecurity really do matter, and the more that is being done and around that space, then the more messaging and people who haven't thought about that industry can look at whether it's hacking groups, whether it's leadership panels and CISO panels. Um, but it does really matter. All that stuff has to happen, doesn't it, to continue to feed the message through that this is an industry that everybody and anybody from all walks of background can sort of move into.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as we discussed earlier, I do feel like, especially in security, we need more talent. We're at war with attackers who don't play by the same rules that we do. And
Mm,
so we need, as much expertise that we can get, regardless of gender, race, background. In fact, as cyber attacks move towards the browser, I feel that there's going to be more innovation on the social engineering side instead of, the technology side when it comes to new attacks.
mhm.
So people that come from, other industries, whether it's healthcare, finance, you name it, I feel like the domain expertise of understanding how employees and individuals interact with software and, do their day-to-day tasks and how that can be exploited by attackers is actually very valuable information, perhaps more so than ever before.
Yeah, no, indeed. Um, and talking about startups, because obviously SquareX 2023 was established, so real sort of startup mode, um, a handful of people, investment. What's it like working in a sort of a high growth cybersecurity startup?
I mean, Nick, I absolutely love it. You probably figured out from my background, but I'm interested in a lot of things. I love doing research, I love science, I love tech, but I'm also really interested in learning how a business is run. And I think the benefit of being in a startup is
Mm,
you don't get pigeonholed. You don't have to kind of specialize in a very narrow focus, and if you have the right talent and ambition, you can put your hands across many different things. So, I work across different things such as product marketing, strategy, research. And I think all of them are super interesting. And since my time at VC, and perhaps even my younger self, my whole family are a bunch of entrepreneurs. So I've always been very excited to learn how tech companies and tech startups are run. I
mm.
think being able to, work across the different departments gives you the best visibility for that.
And wearing many caps and doing lots of different things, and like you said, not being pigeonholed. It's exciting, it's fast paced. Have you got sort of any exciting moments that you can share versus sort of really tough challenges like, oh my God, what am I doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best part is really the ability to learn super fast, and
Mm,
being part of the journey where you feel like you're taking on incumbents, right? You watch the company grow, both, in terms of business and revenue and all that, but also as a team. I think we've been hiring a lot in the US for our sales team or go-to-market team. And I think watching that come together and watching a lot of people become more excited about the space that we're building in has been, incredibly exciting. Like just a year ago, the term BDR was never heard by anyone, but today, we go to conferences. Sometimes I speak to recruiters. I'm like, hey, you guys are the people who invented the term BDR, right? And you guys are, doing XYZ research. And I think it's just been really inspiring to see that the work you do create change out there, whether it's just raising awareness or, actually providing defense for companies. So I think that's very exciting. I would say there's definitely challenges that come with it. Because I work across departments, there's a lot of things going on. And I think in a startup, the only way to win is to be very creative and experiment in different ways that you can, essentially kind of outbeat the incumbents. But as a result, a lot of the things that you try won't work. And I
Mm.
think it took me some time as well, but I think it's important to understand and not take that as a personal failure, but almost like a rite of passage or a necessary cost to find the one thing that works. So I think still a lot of learning for myself, but it's definitely been an exciting journey. And I think the next 1 to 2 years and the future of SquareX, I'm really excited to be part of it.
And because you have grown, quite quickly as a startup, and you, like you mentioned, go to market team in the US, when you are bringing lots of people in a short period of
Mhm.
time, sort of that culture, embedding a new culture, embedding lots of different people, different time zones. How's that worked for you guys?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely been something we've been very mindful of. So our team is we're in person in Singapore, but for the rest of it, we're pretty fully remote. We have team members in Australia, India, the US. So I think time zone aside, it's a lot of the cultural integrations that we have to do. The ways
Mm,
of working that are very different between let's say Americans and Asians.
sure.
But I think it does help that we are still a relatively small team and we're able to communicate. And I think the culture of transparency, admitting mistakes, being able to communicate openly what you need, what's working, what's not working, I think that's essential in a startup.
Yeah. Okay. 100%. Sounds exciting. And because you've mentioned that you've worked across lots of different departments and with lots of different stakeholders in SquareX. What's a typical day for you then? Because I think you're working on some white papers at the moment, aren't you?
Yeah, it's funny you should ask. I don't think there's a typical day, but
Doesn't exist.
yeah, not at all. Like today was completely different to what I thought it would be this morning. But
Mm,
I'd say I work primarily across three things. So one is the research piece, the Your
mhm.
Browser Bugs project I'm mentioning previously. I do some of our research papers that we submit to conferences. So I'll actually be speaking at B-Sides SF this year. We're actually also working on a book as a side project on web security. So as I mentioned earlier, I felt like there wasn't a lot of resources out there for people to learn structurally about the space. And especially because web security, browser security is so new, we felt like it's important for us to set the landscape on the threats and how it has evolved. So we're working with a couple of industry leaders, CISOs, and universities to put this book together. Well, the second piece that I'm working on is really under product marketing. So I work very closely with the product team and also the marketing team to put out all our white papers, more technical content on social media to make sure that it really reflects how fast our product is moving. And last but not least, I help with a lot of key strategic initiatives with our advisors and all the thought leadership that we're doing with partners outside of SquareX.
There is no job title for that. There's a
Exactly.
okay. So AI and cybersecurity, big talking point still, and
Mhm.
increasingly so. And I guess eh, with the industry with the product base that you guys are going to market with, opportunities and risks around AI. How does that fare with you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think AI has definitely significantly brought down the barrier and cost to text, and especially, high quality text like spear phishing, where you want to write, very targeted content. Previously, it would take someone who's who's relatively well versed in this space.
Mm,
But now you can very quickly create many variations of malwares, spear phishing emails just using ChatGPT. I think
yeah.
there was a report by Harvard Business Review that said it's now 90% cheaper to write high quality spear phishing attacks. And they had A/B tested the performance with spear phishing emails written by experts. And I think the performance was just about the same. So it is definitely something that is extremely alarming.
Mm,
We'll actually be releasing an attack this month that also leverages another type, another element of AI. So using AI agent to automate some of the attack sequences. And I think that really is where the future is moving. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of opportunities, right? The same technology that's being used for attacks can be used for, trainings. We can use it for automation of threat intelligence and incident response. And we outside of LLMs, I think there's also a lot of development in traditional, quote unquote, traditional AI and
mm,
ML.
Mm,
that can be used for, more advanced spear phishing detection,
mm.
behavior analysis for users, apps, extensions. I think there's still a lot of work that we can do. It's always a cat and mouse race, right? Whenever there's a new technology that comes out, it expands the attack surface, but also creates a lot of opportunities for defenders as well.
Yeah, 100%. It is cat and mouse, isn't it, as you say? And I guess, excuse me, startup environment and having, you know, the opportunity to use a lot of different AI tools, whereas five,
Mhm.
6 years ago, startups didn't have this type of opportunity. Have you seen there sort of be a real benefit of plugging into lots of different AI tooling and leveraging it from a startup perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So, at our company, for example, we use a lot of AI in our products. So, both from a detection standpoint, so what I mentioned earlier on, creating more robust algorithms to analyze behavior and
Mm,
heuristics to identify suspicious behavior. We built our own extension threat feed based on that. We conduct dynamic analysis on a lot of sites and extension behavior. But I think it also improves user experience in a lot of ways. So one of the major pain points for enterprises when they adopt new products, they have to relearn how the product works. They
mm.
normally come with hundreds and thousands of parameters, and security teams hate learning those. So one thing that we've built from day one is this AI policy engine where instead of learning all of that, you can essentially just type in your business case and it'll automatically select the relevant parameters. And that really removes the barrier to entry of adoption. And I think it has significantly sped up our timelines when it comes to proof of values and things like that. So I'd say, things that are specific to security, but also, things that are more general and UX experience focused are, great opportunities to leverage AI.
And being in this, fast moving startup environment, what are the three things that keep you up at night, would you say?
Good question. So I think the biggest fear for a startup is that you'll die of security.
Mm,
I think coming from the VC space, one thing I learned is that the best product doesn't always win, especially in a new space. A lot of enterprises, customers rely on their vendors to educate them on new threats. So we are competing with, competitors, not just in the product space, but also marketing. And it's always a fine balance to want to be truthful. So how do we compete with people that, perhaps have false claims on some of their products. And we
mm,
have
mm.
witnessed this a lot of the times, but we feel that it's important to build an enduring company to be, very truthful on what's technologically possible. So I think that's one. The second thing, maybe slightly less focused on SquareX, is just the general attack landscape. I think being in this space has taught me that attackers are so smart, right? They're figuring out new ways to exploit users every single day. And I feel like at this stage, most enterprises and individuals are not ready to defend against these web attacks. So there's very little awareness on what web attacks are out there, much less how to solve it, right? So I think the education piece here, whether people are going to adopt or not going to adopt SquareX, helping raise awareness on the tech vectors that are existing today, I think is absolutely critical.
Yeah, I mean they're really sophisticated, aren't they? The bad guys.
Mhm.
Yeah, they run as organizations, and I think unless you're in the industry, you don't really you still a lot of people I think still think that it's somebody in a the fourth bedroom of a house trying to attack, but it's really sophisticated and advanced today.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Um, so I guess then looking ahead, the roadmap for you, the next 6 months, what does it look like?
Mhm. Yeah, so I think we are significantly expanding our go-to-market team. We
Hmm.
are starting to see a lot of repeatability and what customers are looking for, what are the challenges that they're facing that we want to solve. So we are definitely expecting to grow the team a lot, and with
Hmm.
that comes growing pains. So I think that will be an exciting time for us to learn as a team and on how to navigate this. On the product side, I think we'll continue to research on new attacks and make sure that we defend against the latest and the greatest.
Mm.
We're also adding a lot more features on the threat feed and intelligence side. I think now that we have more data from customers when it comes to, what things they're facing that better informs us on what we need to build and prioritize, and what sort of things people require from a data and analytics standpoint. So I
Mm.
think really the next, let's say 18 months, we'll see the product evolve a lot, the team evolve a lot, and I think the space itself evolve a lot. So I'm really excited, Nick.
Yeah, I think it will be everything's changing 6, 12, 18 months. There's job titles out there that don't exist at the moment that will come to the surface. AI still has its huge part to play. That's evolving.
Hmm.
And I think because like you said, and what SquareX's product does, and it's first of its kind, that it's going to evolve. I think quite speedy. In terms of, I guess, the biggest industry shifts on the horizon, where do you see that? What do you see happening there?
Yeah, I think it's really an interesting time, and I know I've said this many times, but we are definitely seeing the incumbents starting to make moves in this space. So
Mm,
Netscope and CyberArk released their own enterprise browser. We're not exactly in that space, but it
mm,
is adjacent, and I think it reflects that people are starting to think about browser security. I think I'll expect to see some acquisitions happen this year. We saw Falcon Fund, CrowdStrike, CVC invest in Seraphic.
mm.
Many, incumbents from the SASE, SSC, and EDR space has reached out to us to learn about our product and attack disclosures. And I know some of our competitors has been having conversations too. So I think we'll be expecting some of the early acquisitions to happen. And, hopefully, SquareX will continue to innovate and be at the forefront of this space.
Brilliant. We love to every guest that we have on the podcast, Audrey, we love to ask
Hmm.
general advice to the next generation or people looking to transfer skill sets into this industry. Um,
Hmm.
and we've had all guests from big corporations and multi graduates and startups alike. What would be, if you like, and you've touched on your um, responsibilities that are really, really varied, and you're
Hmm.
wearing many different caps. What would you say the key skills are needed to thrive in a cybersecurity startup
Hmm.
organization?
Yeah, I don't know if this is specific to security or just startups in
Mm,
general, but I think definitely a love for learning, huge curiosity and creativity around what you can do and things. So I feel like if you're someone who, really likes processes and really likes to be, you know, the best in a prescriptive manner, and that's nothing wrong with that, corporate is for you.
mm,
But if you love, trying to find new ways to do things, I think startup is a great place to experiment with it. I also think startups are great for people who, are comfortable with uncertainty for a very long time. I think it's
yeah,
extremely rewarding, but in the short term, as I mentioned, a lot of things will break, a lot of things won't work.
yeah,
And I think you just gotta focus on, the 1% that does, because often that's, more than enough to create a enduring company. And I think I also have seen a pattern across my time at Sequoia and here that a lot of people that really end up running long in startups are people who have a passion to prove establishment wrong. And I
mm,
think especially in cyber, if you're in the attacker side, that's kind of a double whammy, right? Both, as a startup trying to take on incumbents, but also as an attacker trying to break things. So I think people who like challenging how incumbents are doing things, people's beliefs on technological limits, how marketing, sales, graphic design, any, sort of function should or can be done, I think startups would be a very exciting place for you.
yeah, definitely. It's not for everybody, but it certainly is somewhere where what we find and to people that we talk to in the industry is that you can be creative. It's really varied. It's not the norm. Everything is different. Every day is different. You don't really have a job title. You've got probably 10 all mixed into one, but it does
Mhm.
create lots of opportunity as well, doesn't it? It can lead into, in 12, 14 months, you can be in a completely different type of role set, which maybe you wouldn't get that opportunity in a big corporate where it's maybe sometimes a
Yeah.
lot slower.
And I think the beauty is like the company is growing, so what the company needs at different stages is also different. I think that's
Mm,
partly why someone's role at a startup evolves a lot. I think it gives young people the opportunity to take on more responsibility early on, but it
Yeah.
also gives you the chance to try many different things and figure out what you want to eventually specialize in. And I think there's a lot of people who, never end up specializing. There's a lot of I feel like in the modern day, there's a lot of pressure to know what you want to do early on. But I think some of the greatest people, the greatest founders I've met are sort of like a jack of all trades. And I think normally the connotation of that is like, hey, you're, not as good in anything as the best experts. But,
Mm.
I've seen people who are, you know, a better product manager than most product managers, but also a better engineer than most engineers, and also a better salesperson than most salespeople. So I think that's what really makes someone stellar in this space, right? You don't have to be just good at one thing.
Indeed, definitely. Um, and I guess lessons from your own journey, and what advice would you give, um, particularly to women trying to break into cybersecurity? I know we touched on it earlier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I would say if you have any interest, just try it. The worst that can happen is that you realize, maybe it's not for you and go back to whatever you're doing. I think people always think that it's a one-way door when you move out of an industry. Most of the times you can always go back. And I think one of the advice that my early career mentor gave me was, why would anyone root for someone who doesn't root for themselves? So I feel like be confident, just go for it, do your best. I would say find the right mentors to super
Mm,
speed your learning.
mm.
Cyber is one of those things that has a really deep J learning curve, so it's harder to break in, but you'll see that you'll come out way, way higher once you go through that pain.
And there's loads of online training, YouTube. There's so many sort of training opportunities now about cybersecurity. And sometimes if if you were talking to um, somebody about cybersecurity as an industry, and they're working in a completely different industry at the moment, and they really don't know which way to turn or how to put a foot forward. What would be your
Mhm.
advice to just start something? I mean, would it be to start going to hacking groups, for example, or signing up to groups that are dedicated purely to sort of targeting women to break into cybersecurity? Go online and find those groups and just start attending and networking. Would that be the first step forward?
Well, I think everyone has their own style. A lot of people like talking to others, so definitely, join a lot of these groups, whether
Mm.
it's WISP or other, more um, area focused discussion groups. You can also reach out to people on LinkedIn. I have found that to be an incredible resource whenever I'm exploring a new industry. Again, the worst that can happen is for someone to ignore you. But I'd say, everyone has a different way of learning. I'm a little bit introverted. I like reading stuff on my own before I reach out to people. I know other people enjoy listening to podcasts, podcasts like the one that you run. So I'd say, whatever you're comfortable with, go ahead, dip your toes in it.
Mm.
And honestly, if you're really thinking of joining cyber, whether it's on attack or defense side, please do. We really need you. I think there's definitely a much greater demand than supply right now. So I think absolutely reach out to me, reach out to anyone who, are in your adjacent network or people that you completely don't know. I think I found that most people in cyber has been pretty friendly. And a lot of them came from non-conventional background because of, how relatively new the space is, even though it's like been around for like say 30, 40 years, it's still very new compared to a lot of other industries. So I think it's a great time. It's always a good time. Just do whatever you want, whatever you're comfortable with to learn more about the space and never feel like, you're not worth it to reach out.
Yeah, I think great advice. And there's so much stuff out there today. I think you just do it, put a foot forward, and just start it. And like you say, what's the worst can happen? Final words of wisdom.
Hmm. I would say don't overthink it. Don't overthink your career. I think a lot of high achieving people want to be on a linear path. It's never a linear path. I think
Mm.
a lot of the most exciting journeys that I've been on has been, more on happenstance. So I think be open-minded to, what life, your career could take you to. I'd say what has worked for me is to always follow the people that you admire, that you want to see succeed and you want to spend time with. And I think that always has been the greatest motivation for me whenever things get tough, and things will get tough. Like you never know at a startup whether it's industry dynamics, whatever, right? A lot of things could go wrong, but if
Mm.
you spend time with the people that you enjoy spending time with, it'll never feel like it goes to waste.
Yeah, no, indeed. And in terms of if listeners want to follow you or get in touch with
Mhm.
you and reach out to you about any sort of subject that we've spoken about today, because your journey is really interesting, actually, because coming from the investment management background and research background and your academia, and you didn't really have that sort of cybersecurity
Not
connection,
at all.
and now you're in this really sort of fast-paced, exciting cybersecurity, first of its kind startup, and Singapore and America, and it's growing, and you're wearing all these different caps. So you've proven that it can be done. It sounds really exciting. Not for everybody. H- how can people reach out to you if they want to sort of have further conversations or ask questions, and also look at company updates and that kind of stuff as well? Just follow your work generally.
Yeah, I think the best way to get company updates is either on our website, sqrx.com, or on LinkedIn. I think I'm also pretty active there. So do reach out. And if anyone is going to be at B-Sides SF or RSA, do come and find me. I think given I'm also learning the space, always keen to meet new people. I think I owe my career so far to a lot of random strangers that I meet. So, always very open to speak to, people who are exploring a similar career.
Brilliant. That's good. That's really good. And finally, shout out to Women in Cybersecurity Month initiatives.
Yeah, I think a very exciting initiative for WIS this coming month. I think it's going
Mm.
to happen in the next 2 weeks.
Okay.
Is an open mic for research pitches. So one of my colleagues, Beta, she's actually hosting an open mic pitch where you can essentially go ahead and share a little bit more about your research and get feedback from a couple of experts that usually are part of the evaluation process for these conferences. So I think if that's an area you're interested in, absolutely do attend that event.
Yeah. And do you have the dates for that at all, Audrey?
Ooh, I may have to follow up with you on that if that's okay.
No, that's fine. That's cool. And where's that based?
That's actually a webinar. So
Webinar.
anyone who's interested, I think it's going to be um, a US friendly time zone, so it
Yeah.
should be pretty easy.
Okay. Yeah. Sounds good. Excellent. Audrey from SquareX, thank you very much. It's been great having you on Secure Insights podcast. We love people with different backgrounds, but more importantly, people who are willing and able to share a story, which you've done. It's been fascinating. We wish you, and I wish you all the best over the next 6-12 months. It sounds really exciting, very fast. Let's hook up in another 12 months to see what role you're doing. You're running the company and other companies and all that kind of stuff. But it sounds really exciting. We wish you the best of luck. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nick. I had a lot of fun.